Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, herbiologist, and joining me again as co-host, capping with Candace here. And Candace, this week we're going to take a look at the Arkansas pair of races. We've got the Razorback and the Rebel Yell. But let's take a look back at last week, a couple of big performances. First off, starting down in Tampa Bay.
Absolutely, a really big performance by Destin, who's one who you've been on now for a little while. I thought that he really stepped up big time. I think I was one who doubted his ability a little bit, even after he won the Sam F. Davis, thinking that he was maybe a little bit one pace, kind of a grinder, plotter type. But I think he showed a new dimension there, just showed that he had a little bit more speed and talent than I personally thought he had. So that was really nice to see. I think I was one who definitely underestimated him. So I'm definitely moving him up my kind of list of contenders at this point. I do think he's one who's going to stay the trip as well. So that's important going forward. I'm not sure he has quite the brilliance of maybe if Mohaymen, Dancing Candy, or Nyquist, but he's gritty and he certainly fits in with that group. Maybe the disappointing effort was probably Brody's Cause in there, but I don't know how much people really expected from him from the longmouth. So I'm willing to just toss that and see what he does in the bluegrass, but I'm seeing a lot of people who are tossing him from the Derby completely, and I think that's a little bit premature.
Well, it was an interesting race. You know, it looked like Outwork really was well meant in that race. He was forwardly placed. I thought he ran a good race. I thought he was in there to win the race, yet also I think also to set it up a little bit for Destin, to give Destin a little bit of a target. And I think it worked out for both of them. Outwork got second, and Destin was able to kind of outfinish him. They came home the final quarter in like 24-3. So, and they set a new track record, Destin did. So, and the Beyer speed figure came back at 100. So it seems like visually kind of matched the race, and it got a good number.
It did. It definitely did. So I think that that's going to end up being a prep that we can really take the form from and go forward with, which is nice because I don't think we've necessarily seen quite the same level of talent in Champa the last couple of years, especially with the Sam F. Davis having not had points for a while there. So I think it's just good to see really good horses there, and because it tends to be a region that's a little bit forgotten, but not this year.
Meanwhile, at Santa Anita, you were there on Saturday, and you had a chance to see the San Felipe in person. How did the horses kind of look in the paddock, and did you notice anything there?
For that race, I did think Dancing Candy looked fabulous. Good heading out to the track. He was just, really on the muscle. He's a big horse. He really is reminiscent of his sire, Twirling Candy, in the looks department. He looks like a middle distance horse. Real shiny coat, obviously was very well meant in that spot. In the race itself, I never foresaw him on a lone lead. I kept telling everybody I thought he could win because I didn't think he needed the lead. But if they were going to hand it to him, then he was going to take it. I think people, again, are really underestimating him because they're saying he's a need the lead type, and that's just not true at all. He took the lead there because nobody else wanted it. So he's a nice individual. 10 might be a little bit much, but it'll be close. I think 9 he definitely gets. 10, we'll see. But he is versatile type, and he has some speed and is able to use it. But the fact that I think he doesn't have a mentality that makes him headstrong out front is what I think will ultimately be what's most important if he does end up winning the Derby.
Well, and I'm not a believer in the 10 because name me one horse who wants to go 10. I mean, they're all 9.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, you told me Mohaymen was 9, you told me Motam is 9, and you told me Chagaf is 9, and I mean, I haven't heard you say anybody that screams 10. So to me, if you can go 9, it is what it is at the 10th furlong.
Yeah, probably, and I think that's the nature of the beast nowadays. And you and I have talked about this, that nowadays we're seeing horses winning the Derby who maybe really only want 9, but that they have speed and they're able to hold it. So he does fit in that type. If you're looking for a type like a California Chrome, like an American Pharaoh, and we don't know yet if he's as good as them, but as far as a similar type and running style, from what we're seeing in these Derbies where we have had the point system in place, he fits that sort of profile.
Interesting trips from both More Spirit and Exaggerator. And early returns looks like we could have 5 of the 6 horses in the San Felipe all coming back in the Santa Anita Derby, and they'll just do it again in an extra half a furlong. And I'm not so sure that the order is going to change that much.
Yeah, I don't think it'll change much at all. More Spirit I thought was disappointing in there. You know, you kind of said before that you thought maybe he's a little bit of a plotter type, and I'm thinking that that might be the case. He was probably the one who disappointed me the most, but I've heard the most disappointment from others about Exaggerator. I thought he ran a nice race, and people are giving him credit for really kind of made a big middle move. At least they're on track. I thought he was going to fly right by Dancing Candy, and he just sort of stopped. So I'm not sure if he was just a little bit flat off the big effort against Nyquist, or if he really is a one-turn miler, like Keith Sormo suggests might be the case. So, you know, the jury's a little bit out on him. The talent is there, but I didn't think he ran a particularly disappointing race.
Yeah, I thought all 3 of them ran good enough races. The top 3, I thought Uncle Lino and Smokey's Image are really reaching to try to reverse that, to beat any of those top 3 in the Santa Anita Derby. But, you know, there's purse money, and, you know, at the end of the day, you want to have 6 or 7 horses because you want to see a little bit of a race. Otherwise, you know, winning a 3-4 horse field, I just don't think it does you any good going into the Santa Anita Derby where you're going to have 10, 12 strong contenders. Maybe it'll have 20 horses, but I think it's more like 12 contenders and then some filler.
No, exactly. And that's what we tend to see in most of these, you know, bigger preps anyway, so.
Well, it looks like the Derby dudes are back at it again with their new poll, and we'll kind of take a look. Again, this coming from Cash Winning Tickets on Twitter. You can follow him. And this week, there's 7 people voting on the poll, and basically how they do it is they take, you know, if you pick Moy Men number 1, that's worth 10 points, and then if you pick Nyquist second, that's 9 points, and he adds up and adjusts all the totals, and this is what the 7 people have come up with, and it looks like couple of newcomers to the list this week, Dancing Candy and Destin. And Candace, it looks like a few people moved More Spirit down a notch. Any kind of comments on this list?
You know, the top 2 were, you know, there. I think that's the correct top 2. I know More Spirit was second before, but I would see it as Mohamed and Nyquist are the 2 that you've got to beat if you're voting on it based off of what they've done to this point. Dancing Candy, I probably would put ahead of More Spirit just because he beat him, but I can see why people like More Spirit. He did have a couple impressive victories. I just personally don't think he has necessarily the right stuff for the Derby, and I think he's a little bit overrated in general. I think he was really helped out by a couple pace scenarios that were a little out of the ordinary with quite a bit of speed in there, and you take that speed away, and he proves himself to be fairly one-dimensional. So for me, he's probably the only one in there that I'm a little bit dubious on. I would drop him down a little bit more than that.
Now, last week we kind of talked, we said most people thought maybe you had the top 2 and then the next 3. And some people said, well, you have the top 3 and then the next 4 or 5. Do you kind of think Dancing Candy, so where do you see it as? Top 2, then the next 3? Or are you kind of in the top 5 and any one of those 5 is, you know, you're not saying that they're a winner, but you kind of, I mean, where do you think the gap is?
For me, I think the gap right now is probably behind Gunrunner. I think I'd be looking more towards that top 5 or 6. You know, these are the horses that in their kind of regions are really right there at the cream of the crop. And we haven't seen a lot of form lines crossing yet, which is something we typically tend to see more in the big preps, Louisiana Derby, Florida Derby, Santa Anita Derby, Arkansas, all of that. So we haven't quite got to that point yet, and that's when we'll be able to really shuffle out who is ahead of who. I mean, right now people are just going off of visuals and off of speed figures, but for me, I tend to kind of keep my options open at this point, and then when I start to see the actual form cycle through, when we see horses shipping to other jurisdictions, that's when I'll start to make my case a little bit more about who I think is at the top.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I vote in the poll. I'm one of the 7 people, and I vote my 10 as the horses I think have the best chance of winning the Derby. So I have, you know, I have Mohamed number 1, but I have a couple of other horses in there. Like I have Shagaff in my top 10, not because I think he's going to finish 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, or 6th. I just think he has one of the 10 best chances to win the race. He may finish 20th as well. So that's how I vote.
Yeah, and I think that's important to make that known about what you're actually voting for, because it's all subjective in any polls, and you have some people voting on what horses have already did, and some people voting on what horses are capable of doing, and that would be two totally different lists for me.
Well, we'll see how it shakes out this week, as next week when we take a look at the Derby Dudes poll that we're going to be adding maybe somebody from the Southwest, or the Rebel may jump up into there. We'll have to see what kind of performance we get it. This week, we're going to stay at Oaklawn, and it looks like the weather forecast is nice. They've had a solid meet this year in terms of weather, and the Razorback, I thought, came up competitive. I think it's a good betting race, and again, it's one of those races where I like to handicap. You got some speed, you got some closers, you got some class droppers, and you get some shippers, including one from Argentina. That's a ship.
You do? That's a big ship. Yes, you're going to get Idolo Portano comes up from Argentina for Ignacio Correa. So he's kind of the real newcomer. As a general rule in dirt races, I tend to bet against South Americans coming first time. It doesn't always work out, of course, but generally their races, they're a little bit different in a few ways. One, the horses tend to just not be quite as good as ours. And the second is that they tend to be real stayers. So, you know, the longer the race, the more likely I'd be betting one of them. But like this little horse, for example, we've seen running over a mile and a quarter, a mile and a half. Now, this mile and 16 is probably a little bit too short, but they specialize more in those longer stamina races. And the other thing is that the racing there is a little bit tough to gauge because it's not as competitive. So a lot of times you'll see a horse from there who's won like 8 races in a row, but it's just because that the nature of the racing is they'll have a handful of horses who are really good comparatively to everybody else. So just a few reasons why I tend not to bet the South Americans on dirt here first time out, but he has been working well, it looks like, locally at Oaklawn. We'll see how he takes the surface. It is a tricky surface for horses in general who never ran over it, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes about it, but I'll be just watching and seeing with him there. As you say, there is some speed in here. You think Shotgun Cowboy probably goes forward, as does Carve, perhaps from his inside, might be forced to go up forward as well. Steve Asmussen has been doing well at the meeting now. He got off to kind of a slow start, but his horses have really rounded into form in the last maybe month or so. So you have to think that Carve, second time off the break, has a very good chance in here, and this is always a level that he really sort of fits at. So I like him in this spot to win. The other horse I'd be using in your exactas and tries is Smack Smack, who's pretty reliable at this sort of a level as well. Comes in here for Donnie Van Hamel, who another trainer who does fantastic at Oaklawn, and I just think that Smack Smack might trip out in here. He's the one who's kind of press the pace, be right behind those front runners. Drawn to, he should be able to get a nice kind of ground saving trip in there. So I like Smack Smack in this spot as well. I'm going to take him on top over Carve, but those are the two I'll be using in this spot. I think I'm going to try to get away with it with just the two of them in my horizontals. Upstart, I couldn't really have here. I'm not sure he's the same horse, and I just would be very dubious about him in this spot. As what I would with Far Right. He ran well to win last time out, but I was really disappointed with his run the time before that. And, he's so difficult in races in general because he needs a very specific setup. So against those two who I think will take some money, but I'm going to pick Smack Smack over Carve and try to get through with those two.
Yeah, I think, there's some speed in the race to set it up for Far Right. Upstart is 5-2 on the morning line. Far Right is 3-1.
Mm-hmm.
I think Far Right will probably maybe go favored, especially because he's done well at Oaklawn. They normally get a big crowd there, and it's a lot of the crowd that's been there last year for the Southwest and the Rebel Stakes last year. So I think Far Right is quote-unquote the name horse. I wasn't impressed with his last win. I really thought he was all out to win. I thought it was weaker company, so I'm taking a stand against Far Right. I agree with Carve. He's 4 for 10 on the surface at Oaklawn Park. It seemed like he had the perfect prep. Smack Smack, this fits right at his level. I mean, he's like the perfect grade 3 horse that if he gets the right trip in a smaller field, he can maybe, show a little bit of form in a grade 2, but he's really a grade 3 listed stakes type horse. So I think Smack Smack definitely fits, and he's 10-1 morning line. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Shotgun Cowboy. I like the way they prepped him in that last race at 6 furlongs against Cinco Charlie. And, you know, I think we saw kind of a similar type of routine. Last year, Shotgun Cowboy ran some good races, and then he, you know, tried the big boys and the Clark Handicap. He wasn't as good as FNX, but that form is really holding up. And when I say holding up, those weren't grade 1 horses going in, but I mean, FNX continues to run well. Opportunity is who Opportunity is. He's never been a grade 1 star, but he runs in the money every race, and he runs a 95 every race. So I think he was a little over his head that time, and now he fits right where he fits class-wise. And so I'm going to go with Shotgun Cowboy. I don't know where to go with Upstart. I think Upstart, I mean, people forget, like, he won that Holy Bull by 5 lengths last year. In the Fountain of Youth, he was disqualified after he won by 2. Like, I think this horse has a chance to be a player this year. I mean, I'm not picking him this on Saturday. It wouldn't surprise me if he won by 3, or it wouldn't surprise me if he just runs a good race. But I expect a big year out of Upstart. I just think he got knocked out in that Florida Derby dogfight on that weird track, and they just never got him on track. But I also think that if he doesn't run a good race this Saturday, he's kind of just shot. Like, a horse like that needs to run well in this race against this group.
You think so? I mean, for me, I'm a little bit worried because we have Rick Violet bringing a horse off of the long layoff, which often doesn't really pan out well. Then you're doing it over, you know, at Oaklawn, which can be a very testing surface. So I think that makes it more difficult. I wonder if this is a horse who ultimately is going to be better off suited in kind of a 7 furlong race where he can really be aggressive and used early, and, you know, can kind of use his speed as a little bit more of a weapon. It seems like the further we stretch him out, the more kind of one-paced he becomes. So I'll be interested in seeing where Upstart does. I can't use him. I wouldn't be surprised, as you say, if he wins, because the talent is there. But I do really wonder if he ultimately is going to be an animal who's going to be best over 7.
Yeah, that's where I see him. They haven't said anything, but I truly think they're pointing for the Met Mile. I think they think he's a miler. I kind of agree with you. I think he's really more a 7 furlong horse, but the Met Mile is $1.5 million purse, and horses have to point for it. You saw last year, Private Zone. I mean, your 7 furlong horses point for it just because it's $1.5 million and it's on a big day. So I think that's what they're thinking. But like I say, if he doesn't finish in the money this Saturday, then I'm just leaning towards he just can't recover that form. But I think that's really what they're looking at, is they think they got a miler. But I agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised if he ultimately is a 7 furlong horse. So should be a good race. I think it, you know, like I say, it's that top end of a grade 3 level. So I think we're going to see a nice race, and hopefully the weather holds. Now, the Rebel Yell, which is a couple of races later, hope you packed a lunch for this one, because we've got 14 horses.
We do have 14 horses. Big field, as we're seeing really happening in all of these races at Oaklawn. And I'm really intrigued to see what you think about this race from a pace scenario, because I'm seeing so many people just kind of assuming that they're going to go fast again like they did last time out. And I just sort of don't see it. I mean, we have, you know, last time out, of course, obviously Siding Spring went forward. He was drawn wide that time. He's drawn much further to the inside this time. Then that obviously didn't work out last time either. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him not necessarily go forward, but not necessarily go all out guns blazing to the lead like last time. And a few horses who did end up going forward in that race, Bird of Trey, and I can't think. Bird of Trey and Collected, they're not here. So, you know, those are horses who really injected that bit of speed last time, and with them not being here, I think that they're not going to go anywhere near as fast as they did last time, unless, you know, somebody weird ends up going forward in here. So I see this being a much slower pace than we saw last time out in the Southwest. I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if American Dubai gets an uncontested lead. That's why I'm looking at this. I'm picking him to win in this spot. I don't think the rest are going to go slow, but if he's left alone out front, I think he's very dangerous based off the performance he gave last time out. And like I say, I don't see how they're going to go as fast as they did last time, but everybody else sees it differently. So maybe I'm off my lone little crazy island on this one.
It's going to be interesting. I guess I don't know if I want to say it's going to be a fast pace. I do think it's going to be a contested pace. I think Mad Tap is your typical Tapit. This horse has been ranked in 2 or 3 of his races, including his most recent race. So I think this horse has a chance to really phonetically up the pace and cause some craziness just because he's they named this horse right, Mad Tapper. And I also think the Lucas horse, Gray Sky, replaces Collected. I mean, he set the pace the last time. So whether it's fast, I don't know, but I think you got 4 horses contesting for the lead. I do think post position affected Whitmore and Sudden Breaking News. And I know everybody says, well, Sudden Breaking News won the last time. Well, that was the last time. And, he ultimately, what people are forgetting is he was part of that coupled entry that day. He would have been 18-1 by himself. So this newfound love for Sudden Breaking News was all just because everybody bet Synchrony and they got Sudden Breaking News to win. Nobody had picked that horse. I actually kind of liked him as an upset, but so, he can win, but just because he won the last time, and I just don't think he's gonna. I've told you in the past, I don't ever play a 14-hole or 13-hole. Now, maybe there's a scratch or two and it's irrelevant, but I think when you get 12, 13 horse fields and you get pretty much the same field, I think you could run these races over and over and get different winners. So I think we had a winner in the last race. I think we'll have a winner on Saturday, and I think 9 of these horses will be back for the Arkansas Derby, and I think a different horse will win then. I just don't think anybody's better than these. When you get these full fields and legitimate paces, it comes down to trip and jockey and when you make your move. And I don't think Whitmore did anything wrong the last race. He just got outrun the final last little bit.
Yeah, it seemed to be that way, and I think that's one thing we've always maintained about this group in Oaklawn is that they're a really competitive group, that from top to bottom they might be the best group, but they don't really have a star right now. Like I said, I'm picking American Dubai. I loved his performance last time. The way that race was ran for him to finish 3rd as close as he did, I thought was fantastic. And like I said, I see this pace now being much more in his favor this time around. The other one who I would be using everywhere, and I'm just shocked I'm not seeing more, is Discreetness. It's like people have forgotten that he won here to kick off this whole series. Last time out, I definitely clocked some trip notes on him. I thought he made his move way too soon. If the move on Whitmore was made too soon, then this one was made even worse, way too soon. He ended up making his move really into one of the fastest points of the race and just collapsed off of that. He's a big playback here, drawn 5. And again, for a horse who I think is going to get a much more suitable pace scenario this time out. As far as some of the shippers go, Cupid probably could be anything. For Baffert, he's obviously good sending horses here at Oaklawn. He's one who I wouldn't mind using. He's better than some of the ones that Baffert's been sending here this year, that being Taves on Ice and Collected. I think he's better than those two. And I wonder if he won't get as overbet as those two did because they both lost. So I'm going to use him in there. Mad Tap's probably the one I'm left tossing and turning with because Asmussen does do really well with these quick turnarounds. But as you say, he's a little bit crazy. I'm not sure he is quite of the ability of these horses in this group. So I'm not going to use him. But just bear in mind that Asmussen's record with these quick turnarounds is quite good. So if you're not going to use them, you have to be pretty firm like me that he's just not good enough here. So for me, I'm going to try to get through here using American Dubai on top. I'm going to use Discreetness in Exactus with him. And then I'm going to end up using Whitmore in my pick 3s as well. But I will say with Whitmore, I'm very worried he's going to be incredibly overbet. I thought he ran really well last time, but I also thought he was really, really primed for that run. We're talking form cycles. I think he was primed to kind of peak for that race. So I'm a little bit dubious on him, but the talent is there enough for me to use him, even if I think he's going to be a really short price.
No, it's just as people, as they handicap later on and watch this, I mean, yeah, I have a mess load of trip notes. Not only did he make a move too early, my main trip note out of Discreetness's last race was the wide trip. I mean, he was 7 wide. So I wrote him immediately after that last race. He's the bet back out of there. But the reason why I'm not picking Discreetness is I saw some video of a workout about 10 days ago on Discreetness, and I didn't like it. I mean, he was being whipped down the lane. His coat just didn't look shiny. Now, granted, I'm just basing it off one workout and 15 seconds of video, but I've watched, at Canterbury, I've watched, a couple of full summers of workouts and clocked horses. So I love my trip notes on Discreetness. So totally, if you're just looking at the form, I'm just adding this little note in there. I wasn't a big fan of his last workout. He actually worked out in company with somebody, and the other horse beat him, and he was being hard ridden down the lane. Like, they didn't want the other horse to beat him. And so that's just my one note on Discreetness for those. Take it for what it's worth. I'm of the belief Mad Tap is in here to set up the pace for Creator. I wish they weren't coupled. I'm picking Creator in this race. I think he's just as good of a closer as Sudden Breaking News and Cupid. And I think if he wasn't coupled with Mad Tapper, he'd be 25-1. And so I'm just going to go with Creator. And I think he's definitely going to run in the Superfect. I think he's a must-use in this race.
Yeah, that's interesting that you like him in this spot. We hadn't really talked to him about him to this point, but he's a top it as well, just a little bit more of a sane one. His maiden one was very impressive, though, coming from out the back. And if you do think that the pace is going to be on the quicker side, then he's very logical in this spot. I just don't. So I think he'll run a credible race, but it'd be hard-pressed for me to pick him on the win end because I don't think he's necessarily going to give the setup.
So yeah, I'm going with Creator. Like I said, I have to like Whitmore because I've kind of liked this horse since his debut win. I thought he ran a sneaky good race at Delta. Not that there was anything sneaky about it. He made a move. It was a second lifetime start. He was facing winners. I thought he ran good to the stretch and just kind of faded back. I love the 6 furlong prep. I liked the big move last time. So I think Whitmore fits with this group. And if you kind of look at everything as a 2-race cycle, maybe this is the one where he kind of just regresses a little bit and then he cycles up to the Arkansas Derby. Because I think he's going to make the race. I'm still not convinced there's 20 horses actually pointing for this race. So I think if you can pick up 3rd and 4th place points, I think any horse that really wants to go can get in that field. The other thing I want to mention is Cupid. He's a half-brother to Indianapolis, and that was a horse I was really against last year because he had the bad wheels. So I'm not so sure this horse is going to have a long racing career. Now, he doesn't have the deformed front left leg like Indianapolis had, but I see the engine. I just don't think he's – I think they paid a lot of money for this horse because Indianapolis was fast, but ultimately I was proven correct with Indianapolis basically not being – seen again since the San Pedro of last year. And he's in
Dubai.
Yeah, so Cupid's going to have to prove it to me. I mean, I don't think this is no strategy by Baffert this year to lose all these races and then win the 3rd time out. So I just think he made a really weak field the last time. I think Cut a Corner is probably a little bit better than that last race. And 2 horses we haven't talked about yet. One, who I think is just a little slow, and like I said, I'm not a big fan once the plan changes, and Cherry Wine. And then Rallis. I mean, this horse, he had a great victory in the Hopeful, and then he just, supposedly had a little bit of issues because he did nothing in the Breeders' Cup and really kind of spit the bit in the Champagne, but that was a sloppy track. Like, was it really just a one-hit wonder or ability he could pick up a little bit?
For me, I think, well, for one, you said in Indianapolis, he's in Dubai, so he's running, just not here. Cut a Corner, who you mentioned, I agree that he's probably better than we saw because we didn't really see much. He was in that first turn scuffle and all that, and he was kind of done by that. So probably draw a line through that. But talking about Rallis, it's just tough to gauge what's going on with him because he was so fantastic in winning the Hopeful last year over Magnalite and Uncle Vinny, and then nothing. And there was something, you can make excuses in the Champagne because it was sloppy. Maybe he didn't like that surface, but he was atrocious in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile as well. And I don't like horses coming from the O'Neill barn off of these really long layoffs either. So for me, he'd be one that I'm not going to use in this spot. And I don't know if I wonder if he's just one of these who really just, was precocious and popped up for one big win, and that was it.
What about Cherry Wine?
Cherry Wine I loved in February. I thought that this is a horse coming off of a really nice win who could have an impact on this trail, but I just don't like that he's missed so many races. You think that there has to have been some sort of a setback there if they just keep cherry picking him out of these spots and putting him in here now. I couldn't take him. I don't like that. It seems like there's no plan at all going on. It makes me think that he hasn't been 100% right since that big allowance win.
Well, he had a little bit of an illness, so they had to skip the race they were pointing for. I could see this still as a 2-race campaign. I could see him coming back in the Arkansas Derby or the Bluegrass. So maybe this is kind of his prep within a prep, and maybe. But I just saw it on speed figures. He looked a little slow. I think we've touched them all. It's a big field. It's a fun field. We haven't talked about Dallas Stewart and Spike Sherrill, but I'm sure he'll run second in the Derby. So we'll talk a lot about him a week after the Derby.
Yeah, and I don't think we mentioned Z Royal, who maybe was the one who caused all of the mayhem into that first turn last time out in the Southwest. So maybe hope your horse isn't next to him going to the first turn this time around.
Yeah, I mean, last year we had Mr. Z, and Z Royal is another horse. Like, he has a trip every race. Yeah. I mean, there probably is some talent there if he can ever, I just think he's the type of horse you just put him down in a race he can win. And then go back up the ladder.
Yeah, he seems to kind of get himself into make his own trouble in some of these races. So probably one who maybe after this 3-year-old series into the Derby, maybe you'll find a little bit of a softer spot. That's what ultimately happened with Mr. Z, and it worked out well.
All right, let's go off the track. And you want to talk about shippers this week?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to get to that point now where some of these horses have really established themselves as, the 1 or 2 top horses in each region. And that's where we start to see other horses running away and going to other spots. Is there, do you like when horses ship out from where they're from to kind of avoid, a Nyquist or Mohaman or whoever it might be? Or do you think there's a specific ship that works well? We've tended to see some. Maybe I most notably remember Intense Holiday was one who they ran him at Gulfstream a few times. He struggled. They took him to Louisiana, and he thrived over that stretch run. Is there a specific, switch that you like, maybe horses coming from Florida to the Bluegrass or whatnot?
There isn't any regions that I like, and I don't like it when horses ship to avoid competition. I like it when they ship just because I think it's good experience for a horse to ship. And I think it's good for a horse to run on different surfaces. And so as much as I like Dancing Candy, let's say if he wins the Santa Anita Derby, much like California Chrome a couple years ago, and it worked out fine for Chrome. I'm just saying there's always that little bit of a nagging thing in the back of my brain saying, well, what if he doesn't bring his track with him?
Well, and maybe that's a worry for him too, because Twirling Candy, his sire, was a little hot-headed. And I will say, seeing Dancing Candy school the day before the races, he seemed very studdish, ears pinned back, kind of wanted to kill everybody. So that might be something to worry about with him, actually, is the ship, because I think he does have a little bit of a temper from the small bit I've seen.
And maybe they'd go there early. So yeah, overall, I like it when, like I say, I like the fact that Shagaff ran a race at Gulfstream and then ran up to Aqueduct. And I like, the fact that Cherry Wine even ran that race at Gulfstream, and then now he goes over to Rebel, even if it wasn't the first plan. Destin's going to end up going to either, maybe the Bluegrass, maybe the Arkansas Derby. I'm still not convinced Destin even is going to prep again. He may go straight to the Derby. But Outwork will have to probably go somewhere else. So I do like it. Greenpoint Crusader now is going to the fairgrounds next week. There's talk that Majesto may go to the fairgrounds. So I do kind of like it when horses ship. And then there's even a few horses that make the surface switch from turf and shipping when they go to the Spiral Stakes.
Yeah, and maybe that's a time to utilize, your trip notes if you saw any biases, severe biases on some of these surfaces, and the horse ships and goes somewhere else, then maybe that can actually end up working in their favor.
My off the track topic is we kind of hit on a little bit when we talked about the San Felipe, but I'm always, especially with younger horses, I think people are quick to label the running style on them after a couple of races. When you have an older horse or a horse once he's ran 7, 8, 9 times, I think you can start to put a label on these horses. But I remember specifically last year going into the Rebel, we sat here and a lot of people were talking about how American Pharoah was the front runner. Then all of a sudden, Bridget Big Lovey sets 45-3, 109.3, and Pharoah didn't lead in that race. He didn't lead in the Arkansas Derby, and he didn't lead in the Derby. So I'm not convinced Dancing Candy. Here's what I do know is I think front runners have the choice to rate. Slow horses don't have that choice. So Dancing Candy may or may not be a front runner, but he gets to choose what he wants to do in the Santa Anita Derby. He's got the 50 points. If they want to sit back third and let Uncle Lionel take the lead, they can. But I don't think anybody can say, well, he's just a one-dimensional front runner. He may or may not need to be one-dimensional in his next race. And, I go back to, 15, 20 derbies now, and there's been many horses that were clear-cut front runners. And then the Derby, all of a sudden they're sitting 10th because it's a 20-horse field, and they make that move real quiet. And there's been a few other horses that, Unbridled wasn't this monster closer, but all of a sudden he was in a 20-horse field. Street Sense was never worse than third or fourth in most of his calls, and he was in 18th place in the Derby. So I don't think even Shagaff, like people say, I think he's a presser. Who knows? Shagaff in a 20-horse field could come from 17th place. Moy Hay Men, I think everybody's convinced that he's like a presser or an early type. I don't know. He came from 5th place in the Nashua. I mean, he could come from 10th place. Now, Nyquist, look at him. He had a 13th position. Whether you think he can win the Derby or not, he already proved he can come from behind in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So I'm with horses with 3, 4, 5, 6 starts. I don't label them a style yet. I just know that if you're a front runner, you have the choice to lay back. And if you're a Mo Tom, you don't have the choice to go to the lead.
Oh, yeah, but exactly right. And I think that's where you really have to get in tune with these horses as individuals. I mean, like I say, I don't think Dancing Candy needs to lead. But that's because I watch him on the front end and see how well he really relaxes. And you'll see other horses go to the lead, and they're those are probably the ones who need the lead, I would say. It's interesting you bring up all those horses because you're right with some of them. A horse like Mohaymen, like you say, I think people really are reading him this presser and forgetting how much he had to be urged a lot to get up there to press last time out. I don't think he really has all that speed, and that certainly isn't, something that I don't think that they'd be looking to do in the Derby to use all of that energy early on. I mean, he's able to get away with it in that field because he was so much better than them. But I don't think he actually really has all of that speed naturally. He had to be really asked for it in that spot. And there's a lot of things that really affect these horses' running styles, especially at a young age. Small fields will affect it because horses who normally would lay further back have to be pushed forward like Mohaymen was to be in contention in the race. And also distance plays a big role. There's horses who over a mile or a mile and a 16th might sit, 4th, 5th, 6th, or whatever, and then you stretch them out to a mile and a quarter, they might be on the lead. So that's something to bear in mind too, is with distances, horses can often change their running style a little bit because the further the distance, presumably the slower the pace you're going to be going out early. The other thing is equipment changes. A horse we've talked about a lot on here who, in the past was one was tonalist. Take the blinkers off, he has no gate speed at all. Put them on, he could be leading any of these races in that classic handicap division whenever he ran. So, those are all things to keep in mind with these horses. And I try never to be too boxed in with a running style unless it is that deepest of deep closers, because the rest of them can be pretty variable, depending on a couple circumstances there.
Yeah, and see, another example is the extreme is going into that last race, sudden breaking news had never been this huge closer. And I think people are mispegging that horse now. I don't think he's this monster deep closer. I think it showed versatility and it was a nice deep close, but I don't expect him to be 14th place again.
No, and sometimes, a horse like that just might be a horse who really relaxes well and does what's asked of him. And with all that crazy that happened in that first turn, think of it kind of like a NASCAR race when you see a big crash, and so then the driver puts the brakes on their car. Well, I presume that's what happened with sudden breaking news, why he ended up where he was behind all of that mayhem. And he just might be a horse who, listens very well to instructions and did what was told of him to do, and he ended up in that spot. But that naturally he can show more speed if he's asked for it.
Well, I think we'll see some more running style changes this week. I think, it's not as clear cut as it looks on paper. There's always one or two that show up a different style. I think next week we've got the big prep in Louisiana, and so we'll see some more. And then, that Florida Derby, I mean, like it or not, if it's a 4-horse field, Nyquist and Mohammed, one of the two has got to go to the lead. And I think whoever does and whoever wins, people may misclassify those horses as being the speed of the Derby. And you know what? If you're running for $2 million, trust me, Nyquist ain't going to rate. I mean, they're going there to win the money to begin with. I mean, but I don't think that it means the front runner.
No, and that's something to keep in mind too with these big preps that we have coming up the last round. Often we have really large fields. We won't probably in the Florida Derby, but the others probably means we will have big fields. And so, anytime you look at that 14, 13, 12, 11, if any of those horses have ever shown any speed at all, oftentimes they'll just skyrocket to the lead because they think, well, at least we're in the race. We have a chance now. Whereas if you drop out the back and you need to hit the board to make the Derby, well, now you're putting your fate kind of in luck's hands.
Well, looking forward to seeing the results of the Rebel Yell. The Razorback should be fun. We'll see what the Argentinian can do. And Sig Mendoza says he's good enough to win a Grade 3 in America. So we'll see if Siggy is right about his scouting report on the Italian stallion from Argentina there. So that's going to do it. Until next week, another edition of Down to the Wire.